He thought he had it all figured out. Years of saving, dreaming, and planning finally led to one bold move: buying the sailboat he always wanted. It was supposed to be the beginning of a new life at sea. But just hours into his journey, a single, basic mistake triggered a chain reaction that would unravel everything fast. In this video, we break down what really happened during those critical 72 hours at sea and how one small oversight turned a dream voyage into a devastating loss. This isn't just a story. It's a wake-up call for anyone who's ever set sail thinking they're prepared. We'll walk you through the mistake that changed everything, the red flags that were missed, and most importantly, what you can do to avoid making the same error. Because out on the open ocean, even the smallest miscalculation can have catastrophic consequences. Whether you're an experienced sailor or just starting to chart your course, this story holds vital lessons about preparation, judgment, and the harsh reality of life at sea. So, stay with us, subscribe for more real-world sailing insights, and let us know in the comments, what's the one mistake you always double-check before casting off? Let's get into it. The Annapolis Marina glowed under a September sunset, the Chesapeake Bay reflecting streaks of orange and pink as John stood on the dock, his weathered hands tracing the lifelines of his Benito Oceanus 40. The sailboat, named Second Chance, was his lifeline, his escape, his everything. At 42, John had poured his life savings, $180,000, into this 40-foot cruiser, a vessel he'd dreamed of owning since his first sailing lesson a decade ago. He'd sold his car, cashed out his 401k, and walked away from a soul-crushing accounting job in Baltimore to chase a life unmoored, living aboard, chasing horizons. His plan was bold: sail from Annapolis to Miami, a 1,000-mile journey down the Atlantic coast and through the Gulf of Mexico to start anew as a live-aboard cruiser. Friends had cautioned him: hire a surveyor, invest in top-tier gear, take a shakedown cruise. John, stubborn and frugal, dismissed them. He'd studied charts, watched YouTube tutorials, and aced weekend sailing courses. He knew the theory: sail trim, navigation, weather routing. He was ready, or so he thought. The marina pulsed with life. Halyards clinked against masts, gulls wheeled overhead, and the air carried the sharp scent of salt and diesel. John ran through his checklist with a mix of nerves and excitement. The Yanmar 40 horsepower. Diesel engine hummed during a test run, its cooling system flushed and fuel filters new. The standing rigging, stainless steel shrouds and stays, was taut, the turnbuckles lubricated, the chain plates free of corrosion, or so he believed after a cursory inspection. The mainsail and 135% Genoa, made of crisp Dacron, were neatly furled, their stitching intact. Below decks, the galley held 3 weeks of provisions: canned chili, rice, pasta, and 20 gallons of water in jugs lashed to the lockers. The navigation station was sparse but functional: a standard Horizon VHF radio, a Garmin handheld GPS, and a stack of NOAA charts for the intracoastal waterway and offshore routes. He'd considered a satellite communicator, an Iridium Go, or Starlink Mini, but balked at the cost. "I'll stay within 50 miles of shore," he told himself. "VHF and cell service will do." His weather app, a free download, showed a promising forecast: 10-15 knots from the northeast, 2-3-foot seas, a 20% chance of showers. Ideal for the first leg to Norfolk, as Second Chance slipped her dock lines, the bow cutting through the Chesapeake's glassy surface. John felt a surge of freedom. He hoisted the mainsail and unfurled the Genoa, the sails filling with a satisfying snap. The boat heeled to starboard, settling into a broad reach at 6 knots. He trimmed the sails, watching the telltales stream back, ensuring optimal airflow across the canvas. The Raymarine autopilot held course, and John leaned back, the wind tousling his hair. The Chesapeake stretched before him, dotted with crab, pots and distant sails, a world of possibility. This was the life he'd scrimped for, the dream he'd sketched in countless late-night journals. The first 2 days were a sailor's dream. The wind held steady at 12 knots, and Second Chance glided past Tangier Island, its marshes glowing in the dawn light. John practiced sail changes, swapping the Genoa for a smaller 100% jib when the breeze freshened to 18 knots. He logged his position every 4 hours, plotting waypoints on the chart with a pencil, cross-referencing the GPS. At night, he anchored in sheltered coves, the glow of the anchor light casting shadows on the deck. He checked the weather app. Daily, a low-pressure system was forming in the Gulf 600 miles southwest, but it was projected to track south. No threat for days, he muttered, sipping instant coffee as he watched the sunrise. By day 4, off Cape Hatteras, the sky turned moody, gray clouds stacked on the horizon, and the barometer on the nav station dipped to 29.7 inches. John noticed but shrugged it off. His app still showed manageable conditions, though his cell signal was fading 60 miles offshore. The seas were building, 5-foot swells with occasional whitecaps, and the wind gusted to 20 knots. He reefed the mainsail to the first point, hauling the reefing lines through the cringles to reduce sail area by 20%. The Genoa stayed up, its roller furling system straining as the wind tugged. He adjusted his course to keep the waves on the port quarter, minimizing the boat's roll. The VHF crackled with a no AA alert. A rapidly intensifying low was moving northeast, bringing 30-40 knot winds and 8 to 12-foot seas by nightfall. John's stomach knotted. He should have downloaded GRIB files or checked Noé's marine forecast before leaving. He should have invested in that sat phone. Now he was out of range, with a storm closing in. The wind climbed to 25 knots by noon. The seas now 6 feet and confused, breaking from multiple directions. John clipped his harness to the jacklines and crawled forward to furl the Genoa, the deck pitching beneath him. The furling line jammed briefly, the sail flogging wildly before he wrestled it in, the sheets whipping across his face, leaving a stinging welt. Back at the helm, he set a course to run downwind, hoping to outpace the storm's worst. The autopilot struggled, the boat yawing as waves pushed the stern. He switched to manual steering, his hands aching on the wheel. The barometer kept falling, 29.5 inches. A sailing manual's warning echoed in his mind. A rapid drop means trouble. He considered heaving to, backing the jib and locking the helm to leeward to stabilize the boat, but he'd only practiced it once in calm waters. Running felt safer, familiar. Night fell, and the storm roared to life. The wind screamed at 35 knots, the seas towering at 10 feet, their crests curling and breaking in frothy chaos. Second Chance surfed down waves, the speed log spiking to 9 knots, the hull shuddering with each plunge. John's heart raced. He should have reefed to the second point earlier, rigged a drogue to slow the boat, or deployed a sea anchor to ride out the gale. The boom swung restlessly, unsecured by a preventer, a line he hadn't rigged, thinking it unnecessary for a coastal run. A rogue wave slammed the stern and the boat broached, heeling violently to port. The boom jibed with a sickening crack, snapping a shroud. The mast quivered, its aluminum groaning under the strain. Water sloshed below decks, not from a hull breach, but through deck fittings and hatches John hadn't double-checked. The bilge pump hummed, but it was losing ground. He grabbed the VHF and issued a mayday, his voice trembling. "Mayday, mayday. This is Second Chance, position 32 degree 45 N, 78 grade 10 W, taking on water. Need immediate assistance." Static answered. His basic VHF lacked the range of a high-powered unit, and he was too far from shore. The satellite communicator he'd deemed too expensive would have been a lifeline. He tried the engine, hoping to gain control, but it sputtered. Water in the fuel, likely from a poorly sealed tank. Another wave hit, and the boat lurched, the mast bending further as another shroud parted. Panic clawed at him. The storm was now a full gale, winds hitting 45 knots, seas 12 feet and chaotic. John scrambled to the cockpit locker, pulling out the life-raft canister. His hands shook as he tethered it to the boat, the orange nylon inflating with a hiss, bobbing wildly in the waves. He threw in a ditch bag, flares, a handheld VHF, 2 liters of water, items he'd packed almost as an afterthought. The boat was listing heavily now, water flooding the cabin. He cut the tether and leapt into the raft as Second Chance began to sink, its hull swallowed by the Black Sea, leaving only bubbles and debris. His life savings, his dream, gone in minutes. For 72 hours, John drifted in the life raft, a 6-foot cocoon of rubber and fear. The storm raged on, waves breaking over the canopy, soaking him. He rationed his water, 1 sip every few hours, his lips cracking under the salt spray. The handheld VHF was useless without a signal, and his flares went unseen. He thought of his mistakes, trusting a single weather app, skipping the surveyor, cheaping out on gear. He'd been so sure he was prepared, so confident in his self-taught skills. Now, alone in the dark, he saw the arrogance of it all. The first day was a blur of nausea and terror. Waves tossed the raft like a toy, and John shivered, despite the Gulf's warm waters, his body reacting to shock. He scanned the horizon for ships, but the sea was empty. His mind replayed the storm. The moment he chose to run instead of heave to, the failure to rig a preventer, the water flooding through unsealed hatches. He'd ignored the barometer's warning, dismissed the need for redundant systems. Each choice haunted him, a chain of errors that led to this. By the second day, thirst burned his throat. He caught rainwater in the canopy's folds, licking droplets to survive. A ship appeared on the horizon, a distant speck, and he fired a flare, his heart racing. It vanished without response. Despair settled in, heavy as the waves. He thought of his family, his friends, the life he'd left for this dream. Had it been worth it? The stars emerged at night, cold and indifferent, and he wondered if he'd see land again. On the third day, his body weakened, but his mind sharpened. He cataloged his mistakes, not out of self-pity, but as a vow to survive. If he made it out, he'd tell others, check NOAA, GRIBS, local reports, invest in an EPIRB or sat phone, practice heavy weather tactics, reefing, heaving to, drogue deployment, inspect chain plates, seacocks, rigging. The sea doesn't forgive shortcuts. As dawn broke, a faint hum broke the silence, a fishing boat's engine. John fired his last flare, waving frantically. The boat turned toward him, and tears streamed down his face as hands pulled him aboard. John's rescue was a miracle, but Second Chance was gone. Back on shore, he sat in a diner, staring at a coffee mug, the storm replaying in his mind. The sea had taught him a brutal lesson. Preparation, respect, and humility are non-negotiable. His story spread among sailors, a cautionary tale that sparked debates in marinas and online forums. Some called him reckless, others saw their own overconfidence in his choices. John vowed to sail again, not to chase a dream, but to honor the lessons carved into his soul by those 72 hours adrift. The Gulf Reaper's bow sliced through the Gulf's fading swells, its diesel engine a steady heartbeat against the silence of the post-storm sea. John huddled in the life raft, his body a map of bruises and salt-crusted burns, his mind a storm of its own. The fishing boat's silhouette grew larger, a 40-foot trawler out of Mobile, its crew scanning the waves for the flare John had fired minutes ago. His last flare, his last hope. As the boat closed in, a deckhand tossed a heaving line, and John's trembling hands knotted it to the raft's grab loop. Strong arms pulled him aboard, wrapping him in a coarse blanket that smelled of fish and engine oil. "You're a lucky bastard," the captain growled, his eyes scanning John's gaunt face. "The sea doesn't give many second chances." John nodded, his throat too dry to speak, his gaze fixed on the spot where Second Chance had slipped beneath the waves, taking his $180,000 life savings and his dreams with it. The horizon was calm now, a cruel mockery of the gale that had shattered his world. In the trawler's cramped cabin, John sat on a bench clutching a tin mug of lukewarm tea. The crew, a trio of sun-hardened men, worked quietly, their glances a mix of pity and curiosity. John's mind churned, replaying the 72 hours adrift in the life raft. The storm's roar still echoed, 45-knot winds, 12-foot seas, the snap of a shroud, the gurgle of water flooding the bilge. He saw every mistake in vivid detail, trusting a single weather app over NOAA's marine forecasts or grid files, skipping the satellite communicator to save $1,000, neglecting to rig a preventer, leaving hatches unsealed. He'd sailed past Cape Hatteras, where currents and weather collide, without cross-checking the barometer's plunge to 29.5 inches. He'd run before the storm instead of heaving to, a maneuver he'd studied but never drilled. Each error was a wave that had swamped Second Chance, a chain that had pulled her to the ocean floor. The Gulf Reaper docked immobile under a sky heavy with clouds, the Marina's pilings creaking as John stepped ashore, his legs wobbling like a newborn colt. A Coast Guard officer waited, her notepad ready. "Tell me what happened," she said, her tone professional but kind. John's voice broke as he recounted the storm, the broach that snapped the shroud, the engine's failure from water in the fuel, the mayday unanswered because his VHF lacked range. "I didn't check the weather enough," he admitted, his hands clenched. "I cut corners." The officer nodded. "The sea's a harsh teacher," she said. "You're not the first?" John called his brother in Annapolis, the words catching in his throat. "She's gone. Everything's gone." His brother's pause was a chasm, filled only by the hum of the line. In a mobile motel, the drone of a window unit air conditioner became John's companion. He couldn't escape the sea, not its pull nor its judgment. By day, he sat at a wobbly desk scribbling calculations on motel stationery, a 35-knot gust exerting 1,800 pounds of force on a 7mm shroud, its swage likely weakened by crevice corrosion he'd missed. He'd inspected the chain plates, but not the deck-level fittings where salt water pools and eats metal. He pored over heavy weather tactics online, learning how a Jordan Series drogue's 120 cones could have slowed Second Chance to 1.5 knots, preventing the broach. Heaving to, backing the jib, locking the helm to leeward, would have held the boat at a 50-degree angle to the waves, stable as a rock. He hadn't practiced either, assuming a coastal run wouldn't demand them. The loss of Second Chance was a wound that bled beyond money. John had named her for his second shot at life, a break from the cubicle that had caged him. Now he was adrift on land, his savings gone, his future uncertain. Yet the sea's call lingered, a siren song he couldn't ignore. He spent nights on the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, diving into sailing forums, watching videos on weather routing. He learned how grid files, updated via satellite, map wind vectors in 3-hour increments. He studied NOAA's marine forecasts, decoding veering winds, clockwise shifts, and short-period seas, steep, dangerous waves. He bookmarked rigging maintenance guides, check swages with a 10x magnifying glass, lubricate turnbuckles with Tefgel, replace wire every 8-10 years. Each fact was a step toward redemption. A month later, John wandered into a mobile yacht club drawn by the familiar clink of halyards and the scent of teak oil. The bar was alive with sailors, their faces etched with years of sun and salt, swapping. Tales of gales and groundings. John hovered at the counter, a stranger among veterans, until a gray-haired sailor, Ellen, waved him over. Her 36-foot Morgan had crossed the Atlantic twice. "Heard you lost your boat," she said, her eyes sharp but warm. "What went wrong?" John poured out his story, the unchecked forecast, the missing preventer, the flooded bilge. Ellen listened, sipping her rum. "You didn't prepare for the worst," she said. "The sea always tests that." She handed him a worn copy of Storm Tactics Handbook. "Read this, then get back on the water." Ellen's words were a lifeline. John started volunteering at the Marina, trading labor for knowledge. He rebuilt a seacock on a Tartan 34, learning how a failed O-ring can flood a boat at 100 gallons per minute. He replaced a corroded spreader on a Hunter 38, cursing his own failure to inspect Second Chance's rigging. He crewed on a friend's 40-foot Bavaria, drilling heavy weather tactics, reefing the main in 30 knots, rigging a preventer with a EM 5/16-inch Dyneema line, heaving to until the boat rode waves like a buoy. Each task chipped away at his self-doubt, building a new foundation, not of arrogance, but of respect. 8 months later, John joined a delivery crew from Mobile to Miami on a 44-foot Katana catamaran. The skipper, Diego, was a 20-year veteran with a no-nonsense approach. Before departure, Diego insisted on a full systems check: bilge pumps, EPIRB, life raft, AIS transponder. He downloaded Gribs via an Iridium sat phone, cross-referencing Windy and Noe. "One source lies. You're screwed," he said, eyeing John. The forecast showed a front approaching with 25-knot winds and 7-foot seas. John's pulse quickened. Memories of the gale resurfacing, but Diego's calm anchored him. The front hit off Key West, winds gusting to 32 knots, seas building to 9 feet. Diego called for a double-reefed main and a furled Genoa, reducing sail area by 40%. John hauled the reefing lines, his hands steady, the cringles snapping into place. When a squall spiked the wind to 38 knots, Diego hove to, backing the staysail and locking the helm. The catamaran settled, riding the waves at a 45-degree angle, stable and serene. John watched, a knot loosening in his chest. "This is what I didn't do," he said quietly. Diego nodded. "Now you know." Back on land, John launched a YouTube channel, Sunk But Not Lost, not for clout, but to share his story. He posted raw footage from his phone, waves crashing over Second Chance's bow, the boom's wild jibe, paired with animated diagrams of reefing techniques and drogue deployment. He detailed his mistakes: the single weather app, the skipped surveyor, the unrigged preventer. Comments poured in. "Why no EPIRB? Did you check the fuel tank vent? Heaving to would have saved her," John replied to each, his candor sparking debates. Veterans shared their own near misses. Novices asked for tips. The channel became a forum, sailors dissecting weather apps versus Gribs, drogues versus sea anchors, solo sailing versus crude. A year later, John crewed on a Pacific crossing, a 4,000-mile passage from San Diego to Hawaii on a 48-foot Swan. The boat was a fortress: Starlink for real-time weather, a serviced life raft, a drogue ready in the lazarette. The crew drilled relentlessly: man overboard recoveries, fire drills, abandoned ship protocols. When a gale hit with 42-knot winds and 14-foot seas, John was ready. He reefed early, rigged a preventer, and checked the bilge pumps. The Swan rode the storm like a steed, and John felt a quiet triumph, not over the sea, but within himself. In Annapolis, 2 years after the sinking, John stood on the dock where Second Chance had once moored. He'd saved enough for a 30-foot island packet, a sturdy cruiser he named Resolute. Before its first sail, he hired a surveyor, installed an EPIRB, and drilled every heavy weather tactic until they were instinct. He spoke at yacht clubs, his talks packed with sailors eager to hear his story. He showed slides of failed swages, barometer readings and Grib maps, ending with a question: "What's the one mistake you'll never make again?" Answers flew: skipped rigging checks, ignored weather shifts, underestimated the sea, igniting discussions that spilled into the night. John sailed Resolute down the Chesapeake, the wind steady at 15 knots, the barometer holding at 30.1 inches. He checked Noe, Windy, and Gribs, his sat phone pinging updates. The sea was still vast, still unforgiving, But John was different. He sailed not to escape, but to honor the lessons of those 72 hours adrift, lessons that had sunk a boat but saved a sailor.